Who are you going to get in, Emily?
Aloha. It is the Emily T Gail Talk Story show here on YouTube and on Emily T Gail Talk Story on Podomatic and SoundCloud. And we're in Kailua-Kona on the Big Island of Hawaii. It's the weekend of the Ironman 40th year. Those helicopters are probably NBC testing their camera angles. And I am delighted to have with me John and Judy Collins, the co-founders of the Ironman, and their daughter, Kristen Collins. They're going to be heading over to the Carbo Party, which is behind the King Kamehameha Kona Beach Hotel, where we are right now. And the whole weekend is very exciting. Then thousands of athletes, 2,500 will be towing the starting line. I think when we did it back in 1981, there were just, about 300 people? Yes. So, but the Ironman was started back in 1978. You know, there's been, I think John says it best when he calls it the myth regarding Ironman that has been perpetuated for years, and I've probably been one of those people that perpetuated it. So, John, I'm going to kind of turn this over to you to kind of give us a start and talk about what you'd like our viewers and listeners to know about the Ironman, that it really wasn't a bunch of guys in a bar having a challenge.
I'm going to turn most of it over to Judy because she was the one that was doing the detailed things there. I was just sort of on the periphery of the whole thing. The myth was created because I didn't know what I was doing when people interviewed me.
I might ask you to go a little louder because of the helicopters. Okay.
The myth was created in part because I didn't really know what I was doing when people interviewed me. When they asked me questions, I tended to answer them without regard to whether or not that really told the story properly. And I gave no one credit except for myself. They asked questions like, how did this happen? And I would say, well, there I was, and I did this, and I did that, without regard to the fact that there was a whole other table of people that had been involved in all of this. So that's sort of what created it. So this year we're trying to get the record straight. Doesn't mean that the people that wrote up the story all these years got it wrong deliberately. It was just they didn't have all the information. So Judy was at the other end of the table discussing actually the details of a long distance triathlon to be an event for the Waikiki Swim Club and the Mid-Pac Roadrunners Club. Pick it up, Judy.
Well, we had just run around the island on the Oahu Perimeter Relay, and this was the night that we were picking up the awards, and we thought we were hot stuff. We'd all done best times on every split of the 140 miles around the island, and we were trying to come up with another event that favored the older long-distance athletes rather than the younger sprinters. And we had decided it would be based on our two favorite long-distance events, the Waikiki Rough Water Swim and the Honolulu Marathon, and we wanted to connect those with a bicycle leg and couldn't decide how to do it. And John heard bicycle and spoke up to say, I just read an article about
Eddie Merckx, who at the time was the world's best bicyclist and had been measured with the highest ability to process oxygen of anyone they had ever measured.
And so John decided to tell us about it. And it was a little off topic, but it was about bicycles. And when he heard that we were talking about a bicycle leg of a triathlon, he got up from where he was sitting talking with a run friend and a swim friend, walked around, sat next to me, and made the case that the best way to connect those two events was to go clear around the island of Oahu as we had just done on foot the week before. And let me tell you, sitting on a bicycle seat doing something where we had run hard seemed really easy. And I first said, but some people have never ridden over 100 miles on a bicycle. Kristen and John and I and Michael had all done it. And John said, I think it will be easier for people to bicycle than it will be to do a rough water or a double rough water. And he said it would just reduce the numbers if we made the swim longer. Let's have a long bicycle leg. Anybody who has a bicycle can ride a bicycle. So.
Well, you know, we really have to go back to, I mean, you were all sitting at a banquet, right, of another event?
No,
Oh,
it wasn't a banquet.
Okay.
It was a Monday night. It was just to hand out the awards and the t-shirts which had been delivered late for an event that was a week before. The only talking on any stage that night was to hand out 84 awards. And someone from each team had to be there. And some people weren't, because we found out years later when we uncovered our papers, it was Valentine's Day. So a lot of people...
I think I forgot what event the awards were for.
The Oahu Perimeter 140-mile relay.
Foot race, okay.
And what we're doing here is we're dispelling a myth that went on for years. And I know when Pooh and I came to do the Ironman, and we worked with Valerie very closely, and people from the Ironman came to Detroit to observe how we did things in Detroit, we were always perpetuating that myth of a whole bunch of people sitting in a bar and conjuring up this event. And John, I think you say it best, was when somebody called and interviewed you, it was kind of good copy. I mean, who would have guessed 40 years ago when you were telling that story that it'd be 40 years later and this would have become one of the biggest events in the world, owned by a company in China with events all over the world.
Well, it happened that the location is what threw everybody off. The sponsor of all the running events in Oahu was the Primo Brewery. And they also had an outdoor place, much like this one at the King Camp, that was an opportunity for all community organizations to have a really inexpensive place to hold meetings and even parties. We had been there a lot of times at parties and in the middle of the day, but this time it was not a party. It was an awards handout on a workday Monday night.
And let's just talk a little bit about what that myth was for so many years. And as I say, I perpetuated it. We did in the stories we told. But John?
Actually, I said that I got up and I made this announcement. And actually, I did in fact step up on a little stage and I made the announcement. But so far, we haven't been able to find anyone who's heard it. I came back and stuck my mouth next to Judy's ear and said, I just said the following. And I said what I had said.
So I know he made the announcement, he told me that, but it was so very noisy, Emily, that he had to cup his hand over my ear. And my reaction was, but we're not going to say a word about this until October at the Waikiki Swim Club annual banquet. And I didn't say a word to John. I never told John that I did not hear him, because I thought he had let the cat out of the bag. And then I realized it was like having that helicopter overhead.
Yeah.
It was so loud, nobody could have heard an announcement.
And how did that myth, or that, let's call it good copy, that perpetuated for many years, because it was good copy, and I've even heard people say it of recent, that it was a bunch of Navy SEALs, because you're in the Navy yourself, right?
It kept growing. We got Navy SEALs into it, and there were a couple of SEAls there.
So it was a bet?
Yeah. No, only one Navy SEAL was there. There was one Marine who was at the relays, but he wasn't at the table. And
you brought him back.
You might call it the ultimate coconut wireless story.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
There you go.
One that perpetuates. We call it coconut wireless here.
Once you hear Primo Brewery,
once you hear Primo Brewery,
your mind kind of fills in the blanks,
remember,
right?
this was in February, right?
Yes.
February of 1977.
This is in February, and we weren't planning on doing it until the next year.
In February,
and I'm not a person that runs right out and starts work on something. So
we decided all the details at night, mostly at intermission when John left the table. And by the time we came back, the people at the table, John and I, Sid and Dan Hendrickson, had said, if you do it, I'll do it. So that was settled. Then we said, will you do it, Bill? Would you do it, Bill.
Those
another
are the
Bill.
helicopters probably testing their cameras for this Saturday morning when the Ironman with 2,500 athletes, professional and recreational athletes, takes off for the 40th year and the wonderful historic 40th anniversary in the wonderful historic village of Kailua-Kona, where I live now. I call it home just like I call Detroit home, but I've been here since the 80s, came in 1981 to do the Ironman, and we're talking with John and Judy Collins, the co-founders of the Ironman, and their daughter Kristen, and we're dispelling this myth that went out for so many years. And I love that what John really wants to get clear to everybody is that Judy was a big part of coming up with the idea.
Well, our whole family had done triathlon in California.
And you were an endurance athlete yourself, right? Because you swam, from Maui to...
Lanai to Maui on Mother's Day.
So you were way ahead of your time.
First woman to swim from Lanai.
First woman,
to swim.
So,
and John was going to do the Primo 50K. We were fans of endurance events on the mainland, and we were living on an island. We had to make our own fun.
I have to say, I don't know about Michael, but I did not do 100-mile bikes because in those days, swim coaches did not believe in cross training.
Right. Well, nobody really did. It was all you, right? To bring them all together.
Yeah, I had done a lot of biking.
And none of us had. I mean,
the coach would have had a free.
Yeah. So what would you like our viewers and the listeners to know? And I love you sent me some wonderful copy that's going to be on the homepage of your new website.
Yes. Well, one thing I wanted to say was we have thousands of volunteers here on the Big Island now for this race, and when we came up with the idea to connect 3 annual events on the island and make them one around
3 annual
the
events
island.
that were on Oahu.
Right. To make it an around the island triathlon, we said to each other, if you do it, I'll do it. And then our friends, the woman said to me, the husband said to John, if you do it, I'll do it. We had 4. So we went like this around the table to our teammates from the Oahu Perimeter Relay, and 3 people right away said, I won't do it, but I'll volunteer.
All right.
Oh,
So-
the volunteers start early. Okay.
Yes,
Okay.
exactly. At the moment of creation, we had 4 who would do it and 3 who would volunteer.
Okay.
Now the ratio is way in the other direction.
Okay. Oh,
It's
yeah.
many more volunteers
Yes.
than
Yeah.
there
Because
are.
there's a couple, probably 2,000-3,000 volunteers now.
Yes.
And what I always love is all the volunteers wear shirts that designate the area that they work in. I was just held one up, and I've always been very proud of this. Every area that somebody works in, like this one is my media shirt for Saturday for the 40th anniversary. But that came from the Emily Detroit run, designating the area that people work in. And the reason we did it in Detroit was that everybody wanted to be over by the beer tent. Because we had 200 kegs of beer after our 10K.
Oh.
So we learned that we needed to put on the shirts where people belong, registration, or we had like very official, all kinds of, put a lot of humor into it. So a lot of touches of the Emily Detroit run that are in Hawaii, because Valerie Silk in those days sent a couple people to Detroit to see how we were doing things, as we were all pioneers. But you were the ultimate pioneers in creating this.
But
Even
not
though
really. We were copying the long distance events on the mainland. The Western States 100,
Okay.
the Ride and Tie, the Pikes Peak.
Well, even
Climb.
they were ultimate pioneers.
Well,
Right?
True.
Yeah.
But we were living on an island. We could do this without airfare elsewhere.
Got
And
it.
so, really, you might say Ironman, with your ideas from Detroit and ours from the long distance events on the mainland, we just
And so many people who contributed
transplanted
ideas.
them to an island.
All of us were in the early days, and just like today, there's so many people that contribute new ideas. So, you got a long, and wonderful piece that you wrote there, John. And I think it really tells the story nicely. But what I love most of all is how you say it was good copy. Somebody called you for an interview back in 1982, I think it was, right?
Or 83.
Yeah,
it was
83.
It was
And you
before
were
we ever
laughing
came here.
and telling jokes, and I can just see you doing that like we all do when we're doing interviews. We tend to expound a little bit and tell our stories in the way that we think it makes the story a little
we don't
better.
want to argue either.
And nobody's thinking about 40 years from now.
Right.
What are people going to be saying? So, and that was kind of your personality too, right?
And the people that wrote it up, I have said that people always want wanted the outrageous parts of it.
There you go.
And that's the nature of media. is to
Particularly
make
in those
people read
days.
it, you know?
Yeah.
Because it was an outrageous event
Well,
in some ways.
no,
Everybody
it
did.
wasn't. The people who did it didn't think it was outrageous.
Well, in the
Might be
Midwest, they thought it was
Maybe
outrageous.
the media sold
I'm
it that
saying
way.
the sports writers
Yeah.
in Honolulu did not treat it as anything other than a sports event. They were very respectful. They
Well,
did not use
in
any.
Michigan, they didn't treat it with respect. They made
Right.
fun of us.
But we had left town by then.
And we told Valerie, we will go back to Detroit. We will get people thinking differently. We'll get a crew of people that will come do it. In those days, there weren't qualifying times. We had, I think, 15 people the next year come from Michigan, and we had the media talking about it as a sporting event, not making fun of why would we want to do that.
Right, well-
so I digress. But John,
Yes.
Well, Jack Scaff, Dr. Scaff, who put on the Honolulu Marathon Clinic and was, I think, one of the co-founders of the Honolulu Marathon himself, when he was approached about making an announcement about it, he said, that's not a sporting event, that's a media event.
This was in '78.
yeah,
This was
I can
before
see
we
him
put it
thinking
on.
that. Yeah.
So, but we got really good coverage in the local papers of Honolulu, and I've been retyping some of those stories the last few days, and I was struck that they are treating it like a sports event.
At that time.
Yes, and the first time that we ever saw a word that made it sound more than that was in something that was then called Swim Magazine. It later became Triathlete, I think. And the writer said this must be one of the most difficult endurance events in the world. And that was the first exaggeration we ever heard about it. Really, and that's in the first 2 years. Before, it was sort of a joke, but these people were in shape, looking for something new to do. It didn't seem outrageous if you'd already done those other annual events. You see, people were swimming the Molokai Channel, about 20 miles.
Okay.
Everybody was looking for a new long distance event to do in the state of Hawaii, so it just fit in with that.
On the other hand, if it hadn't had some outrageous aspects, we wouldn't be here today with thousands and thousands of people having come here to do it.
I agree. And outrageous doesn't mean outlandish. It just means stretching raising the bar.
Right.
Raising the
There you
bar
go.
of what
There you
athletes would
go.
do. It sure raised the bar for us. We went from marathoners to training for our first Ironman, and it raised the bar. And we went back and would say to people, if we can do it, you can do it. And that has been a wonderful message that the Ironman has carried for years.
And in
Well,
fact,
there have been pro athletes, many of them in the early days, there were not professional athletes, and it was really put out there as something that everybody, if you set your mind to it and you train, and you have to have a great support crew and family and friends and everything.
well, Emily, in Detroit, as well as in Honolulu, here are 3 things I remember. It was the year after the bicentennial of the U.S. There were bicycle routes clear across the country. We knew a family that went across country on horses and another on bicycles. If the people didn't think, they thought, why not? They just didn't think it was so difficult. So there was that, and the other thing was, it was a period of what they call LSD, long slow distance. You remember that?
Yes.
And John used to say it was go gently, go long. But the thing that convinced us to do the Honolulu Marathon, the last line on the entry form said, first place record is, say, 2 hours and 12 minutes. The last place record is 7 hours and a half. We invite you to break the record at either end. That's what we were taught.
I love that, because we always say we're the reason that there is a cutoff time.
Yes.
And I think you kind of say that too. But
It's not good enough
because
for
in
the
those
cutoff
early
time.
days it was. So again, we're speaking with John and Judy Collins, the co-founders of the Ironman back in 1978, and their daughter Kristen. Kristen, what do you remember from those early days, and when was your first Ironman? And was Carol Hogan a sports writer with the Honolulu Advertiser at that time?
Yes.
Okay, because she and her husband rode across country on their
And
bikes.
that's the 2 I was thinking of.
Okay.
And then they later both of them did the Ironman.
Yeah, we were
Yes.
quite friends with Bob and Carol, and then Ann Miller, who of course covered it for
Yes.
many years. But Kristen, your memories of those
Well,
early days.
Well, I was a pretty serious swimmer. I was 17 in high school at Radford High School, and I wasn't going to be involved. Like I said, the coaches were upset if anybody started running, right? So I helped make the trophies the night before. I remember vividly answering the phone for about 6 people that called the week before to say they weren't going to do it, and passing the messages to my parents.
That's when the rain started.
Yeah.
Okay, on that first year.
The only date left on the calendar was there because it was a stormy time of year. And so that's how we started out. We thought, well, it's the Ironman.
And I know Michael, your son, who's doing it this week, who's doing it, does he do it every 5 years?
Every 5 years.
Every 5 years, because we have gotten together and taped the show, I think, well, about 5 years ago.
Yes.
Or maybe just a couple years ago. For some reason you were here. But it's always so great to see you get here to the Ironman and march in the parade, and for people to be able to get a chance to meet you. But what was your first year?
The first year I did it was 1988. I was in the Navy. I was a helicopter instructor pilot in northern Florida at the time. And I remember asking the skipper for some time off to come do this. And he said he thought it sounded like a, what do you call it, gedonk or?
Boondoggle.
A boondoggle.
First of all, say that again. You were an Air Force pilot?
No, Navy.
I mean Navy?
Navy, yes.
Wow, I
yes.
love hearing that.
At NAS Whiting in Milton, Florida. But the skipper didn't want to give me time off because he said he thought it was a boondoggle. He never heard of it. And
this was 88 and he'd never heard of it.
I trained by bicycling to work, and it was Florida, so it was good weather for training. And I came out here and did it in 1988 and with some other military people. They had ended up having a category for military people.
I remember that, yeah. Well, see, that was
It's a
10 years
pleasant
after it
surprise.
started, and people still didn't quite grasp what a
Yeah,
sporting event.
absolutely.
That's what's so amazing about how the sport has evolved. Not just in the equipment, but just in people understanding what they can do, and they think of it as a race now. Not like a long distance endurance contest.
Yes.
Now it's a lot different than it was in those days when we did it, because we didn't have aid stations every mile and didn't have fancy bikes and everything else. I always say I think it was a lot tougher then.
I took the kickstand off my bike.
It's okay.
Right. And we
carried things on our back.
The reason you had to self-support, the hard part about getting people to sign up was you had to get someone to commit for almost, say, 20 hours. We didn't know, to support you. And no one wanted to do that. You have to be a really good friend to do that.
Our support crew was the Kunataki Ohana, who we met. I think I gave you some of their coffee last year. I forgot to bring it today, but I'll get some more to you.
Well, too bad Mike's not here because he did the second year.
Okay.
He had I guess he was the youngest for a while, and the longest. What was his time?
24 hours.
Just enough. He finished just in time to get to his homeroom class.
Right.
Is that what I remember?
His support crew didn't show up.
We went down to cancel it the second day in a row because the boats to lifeguard the swim course couldn't get out of home port. And that's, without a boat, we were illegal to be running this event offshore in Waikiki.
It was the weather, right?
No, it was just, the weather was fine.
And he was on the North Shore, and the wind was from the north.
But it was
the boats. Okay, boats.
So the boats couldn't get there, and that was a requirement of the Coast Guard permit. And one of the athletes who was all ready to go, it had already been delayed a day. The athletes were really twitchy. He came running up and he said, "Judy, go down to the Outrigger Canoe Club. They have a boat and a driver. See if they will do it for the Ironman." And I went running down there, and this guy said, "Oh, sure, I'll monitor this one."
And that
for
gave
us."
Michael time to get to the start line.
I said, "I'm calling Michael." And I said, "Michael, I'll delay the start till 8 o'clock. If you can get down here, just take the car and call your support crew and tell them to come by and pick up the bike." And the support crew picked up my bike. Not ready for racing.
Okay.
No spares.
Well, most of them weren't ready for racing. We were using them in those
But
days,
Michael
right?
had his all loaded out, right?
So, I think the thing of you wanting to sort of clarify to everybody the real history of how it all started, and at the same time, it's understandable how that myth kept perpetuating about people sitting in a bar and challenging each other, because It just did. It caught
And the story's a bit more complicated, isn't
everybody's
it?
imagination, and we all added to it.
And the press likes simple stories too, right?
Yeah.
And this is kind of complicated. Yes, this happened.
Yeah,
you know?
it's much easier to say a bunch of people were in a bar challenging each other, but nevertheless, whatever the beginnings of the story of how it all started, what a wonderful feeling it must be for you 40 years later. I know sometimes we've talked and you said you feel a little bit detached from it because it's gotten so big and it's not quite what it was in the old days. I think we all of us that did it in the old days feel a little bit that way. Nevertheless, you still have to be excited for every athlete that's here. All day long I've been telling people I walk by, have a good day Saturday, and you know that for them it's the chance of a lifetime.
It's very exciting and moving to talk to the individual athletes, because you can say, you know, how did you get interested in Ironman? Where did you qualify? And
what
so
kind of
on.
bike do you have?
Yeah, I mean, that is fascinating. It's the sheer numbers. It's hard to react to that. And we were just a small part of the chain of people like you and Val, everybody who helped the sport grow.
Yeah. Well, you might say small part of it, but you know, it's the foundation of any event that makes it easier for people to maintain and grow an event. You've got to have a good foundation, and you have to have something that has, I think, comes from the heart. And it came from the heart when you did those first couple Ironman. You kept that feeling every time anybody met you over the years. And
there's something we have to remember when we say that everything was better 40 years ago. 40 years ago, we were all 40 years younger.
So it really
I was.
I definitely often say to myself, how did I ever do that? But it was a highlight of my life, because it really told me what a lot of these athletes are going to find out on Saturday was they can do anything.
Yes.
Because when you cross that finish line, but I say that to people that are doing their first 10K, their first 5K,
exactly.
Going out for their first walk around the block after losing some weight or wanting to lose some weight, whatever it is that gets people moving and taking better care of themselves. Some go to a bigger extreme, raise the bar, and come and do the Ironman, but they have to qualify for it.
Well, I know I'm inspired. I think I'm going to start a 5-year plan.
Right. I'm even inspired. Jack Scaff had said to us on the first day of the Honolulu Marathon Clinic. Now, he started that to rehabilitate heart patients. He was a cardiologist. And he said this, and this was the other thing that really tickled me. If you are a human being and you do what I say, you can run a marathon in 9 months.
Wow.
I qualified. We looked at each other. We're human beings, and we did it.
Tell me the marathon clinic?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
And
yes.
I think it's wonderful that what started as an amateur event ended up becoming a profit-making event, which has enabled it to be close to so many people all over the world in so many countries. And those human beings who have the luxury of being able to use sport to do their work have discovered they were born with that capacity for endurance too.
Well, a perfect example would be the way you were involved creating a triathlon in Panama.
Yes, we saw the miracle happen again.
Totally out of nobody's consciousness of doing something, and you.
Well, the purpose of that triathlon was to show the government and the people in Panama what triathlon was, and to show the world what Panama was. And it 2 years in a row we got inside triathlon, got on the top 10 toughest in the world.
I can't hear you, Daddy. Okay. I can't hear you.
Those helicopters.
I know.
Stupid helicopters. Anyway.
And how many Panamanians were marching in the parade the other night?
Only 3, and we're down from having 3 in the top 10.
There might be more here.
There are more here. It's like the Chinese group. There were only 3 there, but I heard on the radio today there are actually 30.
Yeah, when I was riding out of town after the parade, there were an awful lot of people out on their bikes. So you have people that wouldn't miss being in the parade for anything, and then you have other athletes that are
pouring rain is a good reason not to be in.
Yeah, but also, and it was actually a beautiful sunny day about a mile outside of town that night.
Okay.
It was where we were. Right.
Speaking of being 40 years older, why don't we propose a new event? We'll call it Titanium Man, and the requirement for entry is you have to have one joint replaced.
We qualify, don't we?
Fortunately, I haven't done so many endurance races that has happened to me. Yeah, I always was under the train don't strain, you know.
Good. Yeah, me
the
too.
long just plod away at things.
Well,
but
that's the LSD, the long, slow distance.
And what I learned from Ironman and doing marathons is that I like to treat life like a marathon, that I'm going to get to where I'm trying to go. I just have to have confidence and go through the ups and downs, and I know that I'm going to get there. And I don't know if that's a part of aging or if it's a part of
it's
when
a
you're
part
running.
Of anybody who takes an airplane for a trip. I think going through an airport now is a marathon.
Okay.
It's a synergy of that wisdom of age and the wisdom of sport.
All of it. And it's just, this is a wonderful day. We're in the historic village of Kailua-Kona on the Big Island of Hawaii. We're talking with John and Judy Collins, the co-founders of the Ironman, and their daughter Kristen. And we're kind of dispelling the myth that people had for years about the Ironman having been created over a bunch of guys, Navy SEALs, in a bar having a challenge. But that wasn't it at all, as we've been kind of having Judy and John explain that. And yeah, read a couple of those paragraphs, John. I think they're very telling.
Oh, I said in a 1983 interview, asked specific questions, and I gave no credit to anyone except myself. I didn't deliberately cut anybody out. I just responded to the questions that were asked, and I expanded on my own themes of experience, and tried to throw in a couple of things that would catch people's attention. But anyway, this is what is not the Ironman story. It wasn't the idea of just one person. And it wasn't a dare, and it wasn't a test, and it wasn't an argument, it wasn't the Navy SEAL idea, not an announcement, at least one that was heard at the Relay Awards, not a party occasion, not fueled by beer, not entered by athletes who were not in shape, and not considered impossible by the athletes or even the other regular people that were in our circle. So.
Okay.
There's a lot of good paragraphs in there. I also the part, now 35 years later. You want to read that paragraph?
Say any account that does not begin, end, or hinge on the challenge is considered heresy, and I have to accept the responsibility for that. Later we did tell the story of the two founders, but by that time the original story and quote were out there, and normally the reporter's eyes would glaze over about the second line. Because they'd already written the story, they were just looking for a lead, looking for a quote to drop into it. So it grew and it grew and it grew, and now it's 40 years old.
And we're excited that this year, we kept thinking everybody, particularly in Kona, was operating with a script, and we didn't know what the script was. So we would give answers and people would just sort of ignore it. And then we'd say something and they'd say, oh, and we kept thinking they know something that we don't know. We found it out this year. Kona program in '82 had challenge, all in big letters. And in '83, it had this very long, involved interview that discussed many of the things we had done in our 5 years in Oahu, but they really didn't have much to do with the Ironman.
Interesting. I've got those programs from '82 and
Do
'83.
you?
Yes.
I should have asked
I'm
you.
going to look them up, get in there and check them out. But I think it's wonderful that you want to sort of set the record straight, and that Judy's right in there with you. With the concept.
Well, fact checking is all the rage right now.
That's
Yes.
right.
We'll start our website.
That's
Well,
into the
something
snow.
more interesting is 3 of the best riders in the field of triathlon entered the event in 1982 and 1983.
So that would
So
be
that would
Dave
be-
Scott.
Well, it would be Scott Tinley
Okay.
and Bob Babbitt and Mike Plant. All were early riders in the sport, and they were in those races.
That was
That's-
81.
No, that was 82 and 83.
We sat with Scott Tinley at the dinner down at the Kona Surf.
Oh, did you?
Pooh and I, just I think the 4 of us, he and his wife or his girlfriend at the time, and he was one of the few that wore kind of a little more sophisticated clothing. The rest of us, right? People weren't wearing.
What's sophisticated?
Well,
in Kona?
bike pants and things like that. People weren't really wearing. I think Ian Jackson was the first one showed up with a white Trivex suit on or something, and people were like, "What is that?"
Well, that's interesting because one of the myths is that people were ill-dressed and so on. Well, we were wearing what you wore
In the
for
70s.
bicycling
Sure.
in the 70s and in Hawaii. And we went like this, like you can do on phones now, to try to see what John had on for bicycle shorts in '78. It was the wool knit with the chamois.
Oh, sure, we did too.
Yes.
I still have those.
Yes.
I still have
Because
mine.
they're so good.
We wore our Say Nice Things About Detroit shirts, Pooh and I, because we were trying to spread that message. And fortunately, I was on part of the ABC Wide World of Sports that year. And that was the year that Diana Nyad, the
Yes.
swimmer, who was doing the commentary along with Jim Lampley. And I think it's important to point out that even in those days, we actually, as we came from Hawi on our bikes, we turned into Hapuna Park.
You did.
Hapuna Beach, and we got on a doctor's scale. We lined up, got on a doctor's scale, and the theme was that if you lost 15% of your body weight, you had to drop out of the race because nobody knew anything in those days about what was going to happen.
They did that in California.
That had come from not the Western States 100,
but the ride and tie, right?
Not the the ride and tie, where they were weighing the horses
to
make sure they weren't dehydrated.
I can
You
remember,
alternated horseback
I can
riding.
remember us sitting at the picnic table with Diana and I and telling jokes as a way to just sort of delay our having to get back on our bikes.
Oh, so that was a break on the bicycle.
Well,
where
it was
checking.
included in your time, but you did line up. You know, there were 3 or 4 people ahead of us, but you got on the doctor's scale, a big doctor's scale, and they slid the little bar across, you know, to...
And everybody joked that you could just undo your water bottle or put the water bottle
well,
in your,
Herb
in
weighed
your
190
shorts.
pounds. It wasn't like he was going to lose 19 pounds from Hawi to Hapuna Beach.
What year was this?
What?
That was in 81, I
That
think.
was in 81.
Yeah.
Did they stop it the next year?
I must have. I don't.
Yes.
What I
They
do
started
remember,
it
though,
in 80
was it
at
was on
Aloha
Valentine's
Tower.
Day. One of them was on Valentine's Day, and they changed that to October so that people were training in warmer weather, and it just fit the cycle better. But it was Valentine's Day, and the aid station was a little tiny card table. One of them was, and there was 2 ladies in trench coats. And since Herb and I were one of the few couples doing the Ironman, and one of the first in those early days, they had made us a little Valentine's cake. And we sat there,
really?
and we sat there and ate it as another way to delay our having to get back on the bike.
Now that's the love and aloha that Val brought to the race, and all the volunteers. It must be something about the Big Island, because John and I were much more no nonsense. We treated it like a swim meet. Right, or a run.
because you were involved in those clubs in a while.
Yes,
So-
except that we did have the awards ceremony dockside of the Hokulea,
okay.
which was the Polynesian double-hulled sailing vessel, and it meant nothing, believe me, to the triathletes. They just wanted their shirts and their awards, and that's when we first learned that all these ceremonies that you have, sometimes they mean more to you than they do to the athlete who just wants
And of course,
some rest.
Valerie wasn't an athlete, so it was all new to her. So she was reaching out to any of us that could mentor her, and that's what we were doing. Many of us, we were mentoring her. She was a great leader because she was willing to be mentored and was like a sponge when we would provide information.
But the idea of closing off the highway was brilliant. That's what made Oahu hard.
We had 3 goals. The first goal was that nobody got hurt, or even worse, killed. And the second goal was that we didn't get ruled off the turf, kept off the highways the next year, or get shut down by the local authorities because we were bothering people too much. And what was the third thing?
If
third
you
thing
were
is
cited,
that we didn't get sued.
That's right.
Okay.
And the deal, we had learned this from the Around the Island relay. The deal was if any person reported that you had annoyed them, then that was grounds for not giving you permission to have the event the next year. And John came up with a sentence that said, if you are cited by a policeman, it's an automatic DQ.
Oh, wow.
Whether it's your fault or not.
Yeah. Well, what I remember is reading a story in Sports Illustrated by Barry McDermott. And we were coming back from the Honolulu Marathon where we had been promoting the Emily Detroit run. And we read that story by Barry McDermott he was with ABC, I think, at the time.
No, he was with
Sports Illustrated.
Right. He was out to cover a golf tournament.
Right, and he stopped at a light or something and ended up writing the story about the Ironman, and that's how we decided, because everything we did was as a promotion. We came to the Honolulu Marathon to promote the Emily Detroit
Oh,
run.
really?
We put a Ford convertible in front of the Hyatt and put a decal on it. People thought we shipped the car over to Honolulu. But those were the early days of guerrilla marketing, right? And so we thought to ourselves...
And you came from Detroit,
Right.
and this was December.
Yes, and we thought to ourselves, well, we can turn that into a promotion, which we did. We had everybody in the city of Detroit, not everybody, but we put it out there that people could guess our finishing time. And the winner, the next year, won an all-expense-paid trip here to Hawaii to work in the press room at the Ironman, drive a Ford convertible all week that we got from Cutter Ford, I think.
Yes.
And just enjoy, see what the Ironman was all about. And
I think you're one of the original influencers.
we were we had a lot of influence, but I'm hearing the music and some of the sounds starting to come from the Carbo Party where you're headed tonight, and I know there's a couple thousand people or more back behind the King Kamehameha Kona Beach Hotel, the Marriott right here, Marriott Courtyard, where people are enjoying the 40th anniversary of the Ironman triathlon here in the historic village of Kailua-Kona. We're with John and Judy Collins. It's just been such a delight, the co-founders of the Ironman and their daughter Kristen. We wish Michael the best as he prepares for his every 5-year getting in that water. You know, and it's hard to believe that there were just a couple hundred back in those days, and tomorrow or Saturday there'll be 2,500 athletes taking off. But some last thoughts to our viewers and listeners?
Everybody who does an Ironman on the entire planet is tracing the route outside the reef at Waikiki, where Duke Kahanamoku won gold for the U.S. I mean, he trained and later in 1912 won a gold at the Olympics for swimming. And that just gives me goosebumps to think we're connected to those home waters in Hawaii. That's what inspired people to put on the Waikiki rough water swim, was Duke Kahanamoku.
As he inspired people to do so much.
Yes. And so that is part of the Hawaiian part
Well,
of the
I appreciate
Ironman.
that you mentioned that. We're over here by the pier, just going to turn this a little bit to give, that's where the start of the race is going to be, over there. And it's going to be a very exciting weekend. It's already an exciting week. John, some last thoughts to our viewers and listeners?
In 1979, I tried to get a little help to help us put it on because we lost $25 the first year, and I wanted to make that back. And I was told by the Visitors Bureau that no, because the people that we had coming would probably borrow a bicycle and sleep on somebody's floor, and they wouldn't have any economic impact.
Well, you know,
They were sleeping bag type people.
yeah, I think we all experienced a lot of that in the early days with convention bureaus not understanding that sports were a great destination
Yes.
for people traveling all over the world, and you know that's fairly recent, really, to even
And
a
even
sports
in Panama,
commission.
even in Panama, it happened at that. Families say to the person in the family who wants to do an Ironman, the families pick the location because it's the family vacation now.
Sure,
I mean,
absolutely.
that to me is
The estimate is 30,000 people will be in the historic Kailua Village this weekend.
Oh my goodness.
Oh my gosh.
As a result
Where
of the
are they?
Ironman. They're out there.
Yeah, they're
And here's an idea for any airline that wants it, and that is that you put up a prize, and that is that the first finisher, male and female, that flew here on their airline gets their ticket money back.
I think that's a great idea. You know, there's so many ways to just keep perpetuating the fun aspect
that's right.
of it. You know?
That's like say nice things about Detroit.
Exactly.
It's a wonderful gimmick that just makes people happy to
And
hear
it's 40 years later, and it's going strong in Detroit. I actually pull up to stoplights, and people will wave their arm and say, "Emily, you started all this," because great things are happening in Detroit.
That's wonderful.
Kristen, some last comments to our viewers or listeners?
No, it's amazing how many people are here. It's just, and I talk to people and I ask them where they got qualified, and everybody's so excited. I just love that energy.
Well, I love your energy. I love that you take the time to meet up with me and that we've stayed in touch all these years as friends. I have such admiration for all of you, everything that you've done over the years. You've been sailors and all kinds of things, right?
Yeah,
That's how you ended up in Panama, wasn't it?
Right, we
Yeah.
sailed from California to Panama intending to continue on across the Atlantic, and we fell in love with what we call a Hawaii Yuga drive to. And so we
Panama?
ended up driving our VW van, the same one we had at the finish line for Ironman.
Oh, I
It's
love
50
that.
years old this year. And we have ended up driving from the U.S. to Panama 3 times, about 4,400 miles. And it really is a Hawaii you can drive to. And it's a great training ground for Kona.
And there's a rule, and that is try not to make any mistake twice, but try to make every mistake once.
Yeah, because really, it's the mistakes we learn from, isn't it?
Yes.
It's not from what goes well, it's what doesn't go so well. So life is all about learning what we don't want to do and learning how not to do the things that didn't quite work. So it's the Emily T. Gail Talk Story Show. And again, it's been John and Judy Collins, co-founders of the Ironman, and Kristen Collins. What a delight to see the two of you. And there's probably 2,000-3,000 people back behind the hotel there for the carbo party
We
tonight.
better hurry. We
Yeah, and
better
I
get
know they
over.
want to see you. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
We
you,
all
Emily.
say aloha.